So, starting off, just a little bit of an explainer on the policing and crime bill, just to get going. So, the bill is a mammoth piece of legislation which includes major government proposals around crime and justice in England and Wales. It needs to be passed by both the House of Commons and the House of Lords to become law. The government has been defeated in the House of Lords on some of the bills. This happened last night. Some of the bill's most contentious parts, including plans to give police new powers to stop protests in England and Wales if they're deemed to be too noisy and disruptive. The bill now faces going back and forth between the Commons and Lords until agreement is reached. But some of the measures that the Lords rejected cannot now feature in the final legislation because the government introduced them last minute. Right. These include one of the most high-profile proposals, which would have made it illegal for protesters like Insulate Britain to cause serious disruption by locking themselves onto things. This measure could now only be brought back by the government in an entirely new bill, which is great. We're going to talk about some of the policing bill victories and things like that later on. So, next slide. So what powers do the police now have? If the police want to restrict a protest, they generally have to show it may result in serious public disorder, serious damage to property, or serious disruption to the life of the community. They can also impose specific measures on the routes of marches. So when it comes to major events such as COP26, details around protests are typically agreed with the organisers a week in advance. So Alice, my friend, what you saying? What do you think of that?
We'll get onto the victories later, I think. Obviously there has been a little bit of good news around this. I think for me, it just gave me flashbacks of 94 when we had the amendments to the criminal justice bill which for anybody who doesn't remember that or doesn't know what it is, that was a lot of the legislation which essentially kind of made a rave illegal, but there was lots of other, it affected lots of different people, kind of people from the gypsy and traveller community, as does this bill as well, and was effectively going to make their entire way of life illegal. And I think the two things, those two bills, the one in 94 and this new one, which is the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Bill, what they have in common is that there's actually loads of different proposals in it. And they'll pick, when they're kind of talking about it in the news, when you hear kind of any of the MPs come on or any of the ministers, they'll try and sell it in a way, they'll pick out the bits that they know the public are, really likely to support. And for this latest one of those was, part of the bill talks about the, not allowing the early release of violent and sexual offenders, having whole life sentences for people, who have premeditated the murder of a child, things like that. You're going to get massive amounts of public support. And they kind of don't talk as much about the other bits, which is the really, the really worrying elements on, attacks on our civil liberties. And it was essentially going to make any kind of protest illegal because, what protest doesn't cause annoyance, really. Like, of course it does. It's always, it's always going to get in somebody's way, but that isn't a reason to bring in these measures. And it worried me. It worried me really, really greatly because they were, they're looking at imposing massive sentences, like up to 10 years for damaging a statue. I kind of work on the fringes of the criminal justice system, and I see people not getting even a fraction of that for, sexual assaults and things like that, but for damaging a statue. But again, it's been hyped. That was hyped up so much in the media that you're going to get some people who are going to be supporting that and, saying, oh yeah, bloody protesters and things like that, particularly things like Extinction Rebellion and Insulate Britain, who have been in the news a lot. And again, as much as I don't agree with a lot of their tactics, there has been a great deal of demonization there. Of course, yeah. And that that always kind of gathers some public support for bills like this. But what you've got to think about is whether you like it or not, it's worrying because every single liberty, a single civil liberty that we have, every single one has been, it hasn't been given to us out the goodness of the heart of the politicians. It's been fought for, and that's everything from like maternity leave to sickness pay, to the development of the NHS and things like that. And that is why we desperately need to protect it. And yeah, it frightens me, if I'm honest.
Yeah. I mean, what the fact that like they're bringing in what is effectively fascist level controls in just England and Wales. I don't want to keep saying the UK because Wales and Scotland appear to be a much more civilized place to be.
Yeah, and I think as well when you realise how bad it is actually when you see the way this bill is reported on in other countries as well. Like, there's like people around the world are going, oh my God, they're doing what? It's like in like the Dutch papers, and that there was like this massive article about it in Al Jazeera as well. It's really, really, it's really, really terrifying, and the rest of the world is like kind of looking on in horror at what on earth is starting to happen here. I think Al Jazeera referred to the far right minister Priti Patel.
Really?
Yeah.
See, I've not really seen any international stuff, so this is all new to me. I've just been like obviously focusing on researching it from like UK media and seeing how they're responding and reacting to it. That's really interesting. Zoe's in the green room, so let's bring her in and just ask her a little bit about what went on at the weekend, shall we?
Yeah, definitely.
Zoe, how are we doing?
Hi, Zoe.
Hi.
Hi,
nice one.
I'm massively relieved my equipment works for a start.
Yeah, it's good. Do you want to tell everybody where you're calling in from?
So I'm calling in from Cumbria. Here on the bus where I live at the present time.
So what's your setup? Because it will not be Wi-Fi, is it? Is it like through like a 4G dongle or something like that?
Yeah, well, I'm not completely off grid. I do pick up a signal from a neighbour, so I do have Wi-Fi.
Ah, good stuff.
So
nice
hopefully it'll keep going.
Well, Zoe, it's very kind of you to join. When obviously, just for the viewers and listeners, the reason we've asked you to come on is that you were actually at the protests in London. Was it in London at the weekend? Yeah.
Yeah.
Great stuff. So, do you want to let me know why you actually decided to go? What compelled you to go?
Well, it's not the first Kill the Bill protest that I've been to, although the previous one I went to was quite a small local one. Obviously, my ability to travel around the country and attend all these protests is somewhat limited. But it was fortuitous. I was in London anyway that weekend. I would have gone to one probably more local if I hadn't have been, I must admit. But it was a stroke of fortune from my perspective that I was down in London that weekend, so I was able to attend the one there. I've been on the Kill the Bill protest previously because it's such an incredibly important piece of legislation to resist, as far as I'm concerned. As I'm sure you may have already discussed, the powers within it to try and quash people's ability to protest, and the powers within it also to try and quash people's ability to carry out a nomadic way of life, and to strip away the rights of a whole sector of our society. The cultural traditions of an ethnic group within our society. I mean, it's a racist piece of legislation as well.
Do you want to expand on that? Are you talking about the GRT sort of gypsy traveller community?
Yeah, so I have a little bit of background in myself in that I lived with the convoy for a while in my teens. And so I've lived with that sort of traveller lifestyle. I've also spent quite a lot of time around Gypsy and Roma people in various different times in my life. I used to live somewhere where there was a regular horse fair, that kind of thing. And the powers that they were bringing in, that they want to bring in to do things like impound people's homes, and to do that really swiftly, to give you virtually no time to move on before they can come along and take your home away from you, which is making people immediately homeless as well. When we live in a time with such a massive housing crisis going on, and I used to work in homelessness very recently. I used to work with rough sleepers very recently, and I'm very aware of the housing crisis going on. I can't afford to rent where I live. You know, that's pushing more people into that. But there are other ways of living as well, other ways of getting by, and they know that. You know, so as well as that persecution of a sector of our society and their traditional way of life.
Why do you think that? What do you think their motivation is for the persecution? Because I can't get my head around why that is. Why do they want to kind of drag people back into what they consider to be an acceptable way of living?
When I was discussing this with someone on a forum the other day, when I myself was living on a traveller site many years ago. I mean, this was when I was sort of 18. So it was in the early 90s. Many years ago, there was a family there, the only family that had children, and they were being put under pressure by the council and social services. We've offered you a council house, you have to move into it, otherwise we'll take your kids into care. And they've done that kind of thing for a long time, you know, under the radar, because nobody's paying any attention to that apart from the people who are affected by it. There's always been a pressure to try and push people away from those alternative ways of living, and I think it just terrifies the mainstream. It terrifies. It attacks their ideology. In a sense, it's another form of activism, to live differently, to live outside of the norm. I think that really makes them nervous. I think that this whole piece of legislation is about how nervous we make them in one way or another. You know, this is seeking to demoralize and criminalize dissent and alternatives.
Indeed. I mean, just in line with what you're saying, Zoe, there's one of the biggest and fastest growing subreddits on Reddit is our anti-work. And there's this kind of like sort of meme that's happening around the world where people are realizing that capitalism is not serving their needs and they're working to make somebody else rich and giving away parts of their soul to do it just to survive, or even in some cases barely subsist. So there's been like a spate of mass resignations, particularly in America, where people are like, fuck it, you do it. Yeah. So I think that is terrifying people. And we're going to talk later in the show about the cost of living crisis as well. So I hope you stay tuned with that, because it'll cover some of these things. I mean, for me, like with the traveller lifestyle, like you, we were involved in the rave scene and whatever else when we were a bit younger. And obviously, you know, back then it was the illegal scene. It was like very traveller led and like lots of different kinds of people. I think they're scared of that too. I think they're scared of lots of different people from different stratas of society coming together, particularly in that kind of like dancing and drum beat thing, because historically that's always brought people together anyway. As humans, it's innate. So I think there's sorry, go ahead, Dallas. What are you going to say?
Yeah, I said that is what happened in '94. I mean, you saw like the punks and the ravers and the hunsabs and the travellers all actually working together, and I think they were a little bit like, oh shit, like, what, you know?
Yeah, they were crapping themselves about it. I was talking when this bill first came in, when we first started talking about it last year. I was talking with friends again from the sort of old school traveller community, people that I've met online and things like that, about the fact that this feels like it's the 80s and early 90s again, all over again. It's that intensification of trying to shut us down, that alternative culture, that DIY culture, that people building stuff at grassroots level, rejecting the mainstream. It's got a similar feel to it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, you're right to bring up about the seizure of homes as well. And I think that's what people don't realize is, kind of how devastating that would be. And that community's already been hammered by these legislations, which is what I was just saying before. And I've worked alongside sort of the Gypsy and Traveller community in my work as well. And I've seen, and this is going back years ago, but things like bailiffs setting fire to their belongings and then saying, oh, look, to the community, or look at the mess these travellers made, when it was actually them that did it by setting fire to their stuff. one of the Gypsy and Traveller liaison officers for one of the local authorities as well was also based in the pest control department as well, which really gave you a bit of an idea about how they were viewed.
Wow.
And I mean, I'm saying that's going back a bit. It wasn't that long ago to make that even remotely acceptable. Yeah.
Indeed. So Zoe, can I ask you, like, why do you think it might sound like a very basic question, but obviously sometimes like it gets the best answers. Why do you think the right to protest is important?
Oh gosh. Because we have to be able to dissent. We have to be able to disagree. We have to be able to have a voice to do that with, and we have to have a voice for those people as well who can't do it for themselves. You know, I was thinking about this question loads all day, and I was thinking about, as an example, I was fortunate enough to be able to go up to Glasgow for the COP26 protest as well. And when I arrived, I ended up joining up with one of the Extinction Rebellion groups. And at the front of the Extinction Rebellion group, there was, they were called the Sapara tribe from the Amazon, representatives who had come all that way to march with Extinction Rebellion in Glasgow with a baby. And it was beautiful to see them, but it was also really, really painfully poignant for me because when I first started protesting, which was around about the age of sort of 14, 15, I got involved with CND, I got involved with Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth and stuff like that. The very first picket that I ever did, the very first on the street protest I ever did was outside McDonald's, and it was about deforestation in the Amazon and for production of beef. And it really hit home to me that is 34 years ago. Most of it's gone now. Like, so much of it's gone now. And these wonderful people coming all of this way to still try and stand up for that environment and stand up for their rights. I think that they are trying to demoralize us into compliance. And I think that, you know, by criminalizing protests, that's what you do. You try and demoralize people into compliance because you make it such a risk for them to speak out and to stand up that they're afraid to do so. And for me, that's, as well as physically quashing protest with police officers and arrests and everything else, it's trying to do it in people's minds as well. It's trying to instill that sense of fear and risk about exercising your democratic right to dissent, which is at the heart of our democracy. Yeah, I mean, you know, I could speak.
I mean, some of the best things that have happened.
So
Yeah, indeed. I mean, it's a great answer. And some of the best things that have that are in our society are as a direct result of protest over the years.
Absolutely.
You know,
I think Liberty described it as an attack on our political participation, was how they worded it as well. And it absolutely is. They're even trying to target, you know, the bill was even going to target legal observers, which is terrifying. Legal observers, if you don't know, they're not active participants of a protest. They're just there to make sure that if people get, kind of watch what's happening, make sure that there's kind of no breaches of human rights, making sure that people have access to solicitors and know what to do if they get arrested. They're literally just passing out information to it, and that's it. The fact that they were also under threat from this as well just kind of shows you the sort of direction the state is starting to go in, and has been for a long time.
Indeed. And I mean, like, I must admit, I have been quite scared myself as well. But I mean, obviously, we slag the House of Lords off quite a bit. I don't think it should exist. But if it didn't exist, then there wouldn't be this kind of like game of ping pong as it's been described between the Commons and the Lords. And there were some victories last night. So I'll just pull them up on screen and maybe like see what you are saying about them. So One of the wins last night, criminalising protests that were deemed too noisy or disruptive, was defeated by 261 votes to 166 in the Lords. Criminalising locking on, and I gave a cheer when I saw this one, whereby protesters lock themselves together or other objects to make it harder for police to move them, was defeated by 216 votes to 163. Criminalising interference with key national infrastructure such as printing presses, roads, railways, and airports were defeated by 198 votes to 153. Obviously, for people like Insulate Britain, Extinction Rebellion, and whatnot, that's a really great thing, because lives could have been ruined if that had passed.
I was thinking the other day, if they had brought this in when me and you were really active, Mike, we'd be live streaming this from HMP Low Newton in Northumberland. It's
yeah, would have got somebody to get a drone with a phone. Get that in there.
But we did lock-ons, we did occupations, we did all of this stuff, and now we're seeing like kids who were even younger than us back then doing this, kids who are in school and getting involved in all of the climate change protests, and it effectively would be criminalizing them from a really, really young age. And I don't know if either of you saw the letter. There's like 350 clinical psychologists and clinicians and academics who've signed this letter saying they were really worried about the effect this bill was going to have on the mental health of young people, and its ability to isolate and kind of disempower them. Indeed,
man. So some further wins: criminalising obstructing major transport works, defeated by 208 votes to 154. Bit close to that one. Probably a few populist bits of thinking from the Lords there, because it's never been off the front pages, like whenever there's an Insulate Britain thing happening. Allowing police to stop and search people if they suspected an offence was being planned. That was defeated by 205 votes to 141. Allowing police to stop and search people at protests without having to give a reason. Defeated by 212 votes to 128. Allowing the courts to ban regular protesters from even attending some protests, defeated by 199 votes to 124. Some people must have went to the toilet. They have done some quick maths. So there's another slide after this, but let's focus on these ones. I mean, what that actually means for people in real life. I mean, criminalizing people like en masse like this is absolutely stupid, simply because, a lot of protesters are quite young. What would this look like on DBS checks if they were to work in certain sectors? Obviously, they're out there trying to work on behalf of us. The question before I move on to the next slide for like either of you is, like, why are they targeting the protesters rather than, say, targeting climate change? What do you think that's about?
Lobbyists, basically. They're not going to target climate change because there's certain lobbyists who kind of will pay good money to make sure that they don't put that sort of legislation in, really. Obviously, as well, things are going to get worse as well, from what we can see. And, there is going to be more discontent, and they're trying to make sure that they have the powers to absolutely hammer anybody who tries to say no to them. Yeah.
Zoe, what do you think about all that?
That was my thinking. That they're creating the conditions which will lead to more dissent. And they know they are. And capitalism, innit? They're not going to crack down on climate change because that spoils things for their friends in the short term. Mm-hmm. As you say, the lobbyists are in control of that situation. So they're going to try and crack down on protests because it scares them. Because they know that they're creating the conditions where there are going to be more people wanting to protest.
True that. I mean, it's always scared them, but I think they've looked at this majority that they won in the 2019 election and thought, shit or bust, let's just try and get as much as we possibly can in. I think from doing some reading since last night's Lords stuff, a lot of these things that they brought in, they've managed to jettison them in the Lords, and they can't actually bring them back when it goes back and forth between the Commons because they were last minute ones. So the way that it works legally within the Lords is it's voted on once and then it's kicked out. So we're fortunate in that regard. But as we'll maybe expand a little bit on later, the Tories could just put a whole new bill in with them and then try and pass them. So we'll see. But final slide on some of these victories. The Policing Bill's third reading in the Lords, at which peers can suggest further changes, will take place on the 25th of January. So really the message for us is stay vigilant. Before the bill passes back to the Commons, MPs will then consider the Lords' amendments and either vote to accept them and pass the bill as it now stands, or make further changes and send the bill back to the Lords. There is, in theory, no limit to the number of times this can happen. This is where the ping pong thing comes in. It's known as ping pong in practice. It's if the two houses can't agree, the government could either choose to kill the bill or to pass it unilaterally at a later date using powers in the Parliament Acts that give the lower house ultimate authority. Which, to me, is let's stay vigilant. There's still a little bit to be concerned about here. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think we do need to look at what else we can do. You know, marches are fine, but it's kind of looking at what else do we need to be doing, you know, about that to try and challenge this. We can't, you know, I think one thing that's become really apparent is we can't rely on the supposed opposition party to oppose it because they you know, with the exception of a few of them, you know, they haven't really kind of done a gret deal. It's been
Keir Starmer's a fucking cop, man. He's just like Reg Hollis incarnate from the bill. Like, did you not see him last night when he was like Tommy Corbyn shared it because, you know, he runs the National Hemp Service in London. It's like a CBD shop. And Starmer was asked on LBC about like legalization of weed and whatever, and he was like, all these cases that passed over my desk, county lines and all of this. I'm sorry, I just don't agree with Sadiq Khan about having these certain zones in London where it's decriminalized and whatever. The county lines would disappear if you legalized weed and other drugs and maybe took like a Portuguese view of it, where it's harm reduction, it's putting the money into rehab for people and enabling them to come back into society. I mean, people can research the figures, but there's been a huge drop-off in crime, in death. And one thing I found out about Portugal, actually, when they had fascist dictatorship with Salazar, they were the junta was artificially lowering the price of heroin. So people like us and any kinds of dissent, people would just get addicted because of the like real like futility of life and the grayness of life. So it's to your point earlier, Zoe, it's like they're trying in some respects to go down that Salazar kind of route by just like knocking the stuffing and the hope out of everybody, probably in the hope that we'll all just shoot up and just forget about it all or whatever else. And that's scary. Sorry, say again, Zoe?
They're criminalizing poverty in so many ways.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I've worked in frontline services for years and years and years of various different kinds, and I've watched them be systematically dismantled, whether it's statutory or non-statutory. The whole safety net has been pulled away from people. Right. Absolutely.
It has indeed. Let's take some comments from the watchers, listeners. Let's see. Right. Tyrannosaurus on the YouTube. The House of Lords has in modern times been much more left liberal, if not truly progressive, forced than the Commons because of the makeup, much more religious and Lib Dem than the Commons has. Some of it hasn't been, yeah, that's all. That's the whole, yeah, great point, Tyrannosaurus, and great name as well. Muhammad Ali with his BM. I blame Corbyn. Good for you. Blame away. You're wrong, though.
Thankfully, he's got broad shoulders, isn't he?
Yeah, man. Like the broadest, man. Right, let's see what else we got here. Right. I'm just getting used to this interface, so we're scrolling back through. This is a good one. Jez Hunt. It's the Battle of the Beanfields continued. Thatcherite fascism. For those who don't know, Battle of the Beanfields was, I mean, people like yourself living in buses, travellers, and just out there living their lives, and the police were ordered to just go and smash them to bits, like physically, weren't they? Like send a message to the community. So cheers for that, Jez. Much appreciated, mate. I mean, Zoe, like, have you ever encountered anything like, maybe it's not to the extent of the Beanfield, or were you even there?
No, I wasn't at the Beanfield, although I did know people at the time who were. and I know of the brutality that happened there, which included pregnant women assaulted with batons, included children watching their homes be torn apart and burned in front of them on the field as the eviction was carrying on. I mean, a lot of the footage has now been released that was withheld from the British press for a long time after the Battle of the Greenfield. They didn't want people to see what they actually did. It took many years before that was released. I have witnessed, I have been in a quite violent eviction, illegal eviction from a squat previously, and I've witnessed brutality at protests and things like that. But yeah,
I mean, for me, surely it would be, if we want to think like a Tory, economics, right, money. Surely it would be much more efficient to provide spaces around the country, proper sites for travellers to go to, and not have to pay for all this policing X, Y, and Z. So I think that adds to the point of what you're making, that it's actually an attack to try and just completely eradicate that lifestyle.
It's absolutely. There used to be a legal requirement for every local authority to provide a site, and that was that removed with the CJB, or was that another piece of legislation that they brought that into? It was around about the same time. It was around about the same time that they removed that local authorities didn't have to provide a space anymore.
Indeed. So, final question before we let you go, Zoe, and for everybody, really. I mean, what's next for the movement? Obviously, first thing we've got to do is stay vigilant. January the 25th. Was it February the 25th or January 25th? January the 25th is the next reading in the Commons and the Lords. So, what's next for the movement in general? Big victories last night, lots to be positive about, but what's next?
Well, I think, as you said, stay vigilant and keep campaigning and keep being noisy and keep being a nuisance and keep resisting. I have to say that my big takeaway from the protest in London, the big massive positive from that protest in London, what gave me so much hope, was coming away with the sense that they've actually massively shot themselves in the foot with this bill, because of the fact that they have united so many different causes under one banner. So everyone who has a vested interest in their right to be able to dissent, and everyone who has a vested interest in their right to be able to protest because they are part of a movement, is being brought together by this, or the vast majority. There were so many different perspectives, so many different groups present at that protest, standing shoulder to shoulder in solidarity to support each other. And for me, that was huge. So I think that carrying that spirit forward as well, that spirit of working together for change. But, joining the groups, following this, there was a massive digital protest, which was, they believe, quite effective as well in assisting with changing the mind in the House of Lords. So, people writing to the Lords, people writing to their MPs, emailing in, phoning in, that kind of thing, I think is an important aspect as well. You don't have to be out on the streets at a march. There's all sorts of ways to get involved with that.
Indeed. I mean, you speak of togetherness, and we've lacked that a lot the last couple of years. So it was a beautiful thing to see, a lot of the footage from the weekend and people coming together. And obviously, Mohammed mentioned Corbyn before. I saw a speech that he gave, and it just makes us smile. He's talking about hope and love and coming together and how movements come from that. And he was in Parliament Square, the Chartists, the suffragettes, and there's a long lineage of protest that we should never forget about in this country, and obviously beyond too. And a lot of that is changed society for the better. Just what Mohammed said about blaming Corbyn before. He said sarcastically, "We like a bit of clarity on this show." Welcome back to the fold, Mohammed.